Thanks everybody for coming. Today in the People Manager training lecture, we're going to talk a little bit about feedback and culture. So like normal, I'm just going to talk a little bit about structure. I'm going to go talk about some positive and negative reinforcement and give some examples and context. I'll spend a couple of slides on vulnerability and why that can be powerful and important, and then we'll call it. So one of the things that I do each time is show this slide, because I think that these are really, really important things to remember. So I kind of glossed over it last time, and I'm kind of going to do the same thing again. But for me, it's always helpful to remember that it's okay to ask for help and figure out what goal setting frameworks work for you. And if something's not working, it's not like a one size fits all and every problem's a little different. So for me, it's kind of helpful to look at this and just be reminded of these things on a regular basis, especially when I'm putting things together. This is sort of just a handy reference, in my opinion. So for today, we're going to talk about how to give reinforcement feedback, positive and negative, give some examples of each, and explain how to use these to create a good culture. These are the general themes we're going to talk about. And so I wanted to say one thing that is kind of obvious, or three things that are kind of obvious, is that these lessons and a lot of the lectures that I'm giving, they're going to feel pretty obvious to people. Some people might listen to it and be like, oh, I know this. Sometimes, and for you folks, this information is just reinforcement and is probably in a lot of ways just kind of helpful to be like, oh, I didn't really think about stating something this way, or, oh, I never thought of it like this, but I understand this information. But part of the reason is that there are also folks who are non-neurotypical, whose brains don't work in the exact same way, that you might be that person. I'm definitely not a neurotypical person. My brain works in a slightly different way than most folks. And so a lot of these things weren't obvious to me. And so I might be saying something and you're like, yeah, of course, this makes total sense. But it's not like that for everybody. And so as I've learned some of these things, I've been like, oh, this is not something simply everyone understands. And if it's obvious, great. But if it's not, then, hey, this is a great learning experience. And these are phrases or systems or interaction styles that you can use in your personal life, in your professional life, in your romantic life, whatever it might be, to sort of help you get the kind of results you want in various situations. So talking about some of the types of reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is like adding favorable feedback or some sort of stimulus to encourage or discourage a specific behavior, and negative feedback. So there's a little bit of a difference, and I should have probably put this, but negative reinforcement, it doesn't mean that you're doing something negative. Negative reinforcement means you're taking something away, right? So if you are, the example that I'd really like to explain this is if you have to micromanage one of your people because they're not listening, and then you take that micromanagement away because they're starting to do better, that's actually called negative reinforcement. So you are removing that, so it is negative reinforcement, even though it's positive that you no longer have to micromanage them. So that is like a psychological distinction, positive and negative reinforcement. But we're talking about the feedback side of this, which is the negative feedback. So providing corrective or unfavorable feedback to address an undesirable or to address an undesired behavior. So both of these concepts, or all of these concepts, are aimed at behavioral adjustments, and the goal is to increase the likelihood of that right kind of behavior or the right kind of engagement. So positive reinforcement. So when to use it? You can use it to encourage or acknowledge good behavior or good performance. I think most people hear me say, hey, great job, or this was really good, or I like the way you did that. And I do that to establish a more positive work environment, but also just to let people know that hey, that's a thing that I'm really happy that it happened in that way. And for me, it's very helpful to reinforce those goals or reinforce those organizational values for everybody. There's a lot of different examples of these, shout outs are a great one. Meetings, being able to recognize good behavior or the right kinds of things happening in chats, emails, meetings, whatever it is, all those things are really good versions of public recognition. You can also do compensation, time off, spot bonuses, gift cards, Promotion, say, hey, you did a really good job with this. I want you to do this other project. That can also sometimes be seen as negative. So you sort of have to understand the person that you're dealing with or the group. But promotion or additional responsibility is usually positive reinforcement of like good behavior. So I want to talk about a handful of examples. I'm not going to read through all 10 of these examples, 5 on this slide, 5 on the next, but there's a couple that I want to highlight. And the reason I did it this way is because I want everybody to just have a couple of examples where it's like fill in the blank. Like if anybody did Mad Libs or know what they are, or maybe I'm just old and dating myself when I talk about them, but it's just like being able to fill in the thing with like an existing structure. So, hey, I really appreciate the effort you put into this thing. It really made a difference so what that could look like is I really appreciate the effort you put into delivering this feature. It really made a difference by allowing this customer to stay a customer, right? So that's just like a very clear recognition of effort in a way that's like this thing made this thing happen. Well, that's what a lot of these are showing people that you value their contribution and what that contribution was and what that value is. So like towards the end of this slide, it says your contributions have been valuable and greatly appreciated by the team. These are all different ways of showing appreciation. You can also pull out the improvement or the creativity, the thinking outside the box is like a really common management term, and it's whatever. It's like I think creativity should be the norm, not like a different thing, not like like the thinking outside the box sort of says like, well, everything inside of this is uncreative or not creative, and everything outside the box is creative, which is a very weird way of saying that. So I've noticed a significant improvement in your timeliness to showing up at meetings. I've noticed a significant improvement in the way you deal with projects or how you handle tickets, or it's really made a positive impact on everyone else who works on a specific project that you've been able to do that. And again, like, because all of these things for me are the way that we create a good culture, a lot of it has to show appreciation. And that's one of the things that I think is really helpful to just call out, like, hey, your initiative was really beneficial and it showed great leadership and it allowed for more teamwork. So thank you for going, above and beyond and doing X, Y, Z. Like thank you, like your dedication to making this a better workplace or making this a better product inspiring is a little much, I think, for like a work environment. But I think, we all sort of get the idea of like that positive reinforcement. Okay, so negative feedback. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but it's really important to getting the right kind of behavior both out of yourself, and I'll talk about how that relates to you and the giving negative feedback in a little bit, but also the people that you're working with. So your goal here is to sort of motivate improvement. Sometimes you need to do on the spot corrections if there's like a safety hazard or something. And sometimes you even need to do it publicly to remind everybody that this thing is a problem. That's sort of less of a thing in the software world. But if you're sometimes, to use a specific example, if you're working in a data center and somebody's doing something stupid with electricity, it's like, hey, you want to call that out immediately, forgetting the fact that it's a compliance problem, but it's a safety thing and you don't want people getting hurt. So there are sometimes reasons to do things on the spot and publicly. But generally you want to give negative feedback. There's a standard sort of management phrase like praise in public, punish in private. And so I think that's it's a good thing to think about. Like that's generally what one should be doing. Not always appropriate, but it's a good baseline. So here's a bunch of examples. And again, they're all 10 of them. I'm not going to go through them, but they're all sort of sorted into different sort of functional concepts here. So one of the things that I like to do is, rather than calling things a mistake, I usually just say like an issue or something. But either way, it's saying there's an issue, you identify the issue, which led to a thing that's the actual problem. So normally we're going to fix that, and then we're going to figure out how we can prevent it in the future. But The reason that I wanted to phrase it like this, there was a mistake, there was an issue, is because it's not you saying to somebody, you messed up. Like, this is your mistake, Eric. It's like, hey, something happened and we want to prevent it from happening again, which is a very like positive way to deal with a negative situation. This can also work with behavior. Like, hey, there was an issue with showing up late or showing up on time. And that leads to a difficulty in the team feeling unity or trusting that things are going to happen on a timely basis. So let's discuss how we can prevent this in the future. Not like you messed up. So I think being able to phrase things in a way that don't feel like people are being attacked is a really handy thing to do. Now, I understand emotions get in the way, and sometimes it's difficult, but like the practice, the building the muscle is the thing that I want to do. I want to make sure we're doing here. And the interesting thing about point 6 is something that if you are receiving feedback, you might be able to say, like, hey, I think the way, Eric, I think the way you communicated this last thing to me, it could have been clearer. And so I know you were, reprimanding me or telling me how to improve, but can we do this a little bit different in the future? Like, I need things in a more direct way, or I need things to be a little bit less like aggressive or assertive. And so there is a level of like negative feedback that can be reciprocated when somebody is giving you feedback, or even positive feedback. You can say, hey, listen, the way that this thing was communicated in public made me really uncomfortable. It made me feel like the spotlight was on me, and I don't really like that. So can we avoid this kind of public positive reinforcement? So you can actually use this sort of like feedback to address situations that make you or your people more or less comfortable. The last point on this slide is on conflict resolution. And this is, I don't want to spend more time talking about this right this moment, because again, we did one a couple of weeks ago. But this is a really good example of us as managers having the ability to say, there is something that even though it was handled, wasn't handled in the best way. So, hey, we handled this problem with Eric showing up late. I wasn't really happy with how we handled it. Can we talk about other ways to deal with Eric being on time in the future? Like these kinds of things are non-aggressive ways of sort of saying, like, I want to work on this. I talked a little bit about this with the difficult conversations, but I wanted to sort of package this up into 6 questions that I very frequently ask myself as sort of like check marks of, is this the right time to do things? Am I doing this in the right way? So, a couple months ago, I had told the story of, giving the Simon Sinek, the coach who gave feedback to his friend who had invited him to see her one-person show. And so knowing that feedback should be positive, should be like correctly timed, but also, like people need to be in the right place to receive that. So, asking these questions of, is this the right time? And timing could be the frame of mind. Timing could be, close to the event. Timing could be, is this person, is this the setting? Is the setting correct for the event? Is it too loud? Is there too many other distractions? Timing is like a really important piece of context for determining feedback. And is this feedback specific and actionable? Like if it's negative, you want something that somebody can use, can work with to improve. The other part is sort of the next thing is sort of the receiving end of this. Am I prepared to have a discussion? Sometimes with kids, we'll say like, hey, this is not a two-way discussion. This is me telling you something and you don't do anything different. But that's not the way the business world works, or it shouldn't. I mean, it is sometimes, but it shouldn't be. And so like anytime you're giving these sorts of things out, if you're giving feedback, you should be ready for somebody to say, I don't understand, or can you tell this to me a different way, or I don't agree. So like having that openness and being ready for a constructive discussion is important. And nobody's going to be ready for a constructive discussion if the feedback is not fair. Like that's something that you should think about when you're structuring the thing that you want to say. So this is a little bit back to preparedness. And then the last thing is what I call like reading the room. And I think a lot of people know generally what that means. And if you've never heard the phrase, you can work it out. But knowing if you're giving feedback to somebody, it's very helpful to know their personality, if you can, their past experiences. The way this pans for me very, very frequently at MAP is oftentimes, somebody will do something. I'm like, why is this your default reaction? And then I get a laundry list of, well, this used to happen, and this person used to be like this, and this person used to talk to me like this, and we never talked about this prior to you being here. And so a lot of this like trauma that we're working through at MAP to build a better culture is sometimes me just saying, oh, this person doesn't talk to this person because they used to have screaming battles, and now they haven't talked like normal people in years. So understanding that like past experience and trauma can contribute to the way you need to give feedback or address a situation is a valuable piece of context. But when you do all this stuff right, you get, in my experience, much better performance. People start to be able to recognize that their behavior is good or bad, and they start making self-corrections. And people end up being more motivated to do it. Because let's face it, like some people enjoy work, and some people, what is the saying? Some people live to work and some people work to live. And regardless of the reason you're here, whether it's just for money or you're actually really enjoying everything you do, you still want the best environment. And you want other people to feel like they have the right environment. So you don't want to create this kind of punitive culture or making people afraid to speak up when something's not going in the way it should, especially if they've got a better idea. So you really don't want to like kill morale. But sometimes those on-the-spot corrections are necessary. And I'm not going to go through this whole slide in detail. You can read this yourself. Safety is like one of the biggest things. Coming from the military, there's a lot of times where sometimes you just have to publicly say, don't point that thing at somebody, or things where like compliance and safety are a big deal. But I also like to look at more of the on-the-spot corrections as like teachable moments. It's like, hey, we've got a situation. Like, what's the best way we can deal with this as a group, as a partner set, as a whatever it is. But I always try to maintain like a respectful and constructive approach, because nobody likes to be talked down to, or people do, but not at work. So like you have to figure out what that right approach is. So we talked about reading the room. We talked about like reading the individual, and positive reinforcement doesn't always look the same. It doesn't have to be like happy-go-lucky optimism. You could be like, oh, you did it again. And that sounds like a little like you're kind of being sarcastic, but some people just receive feedback that way. Like we all, I'm sure, have those friends or have seen those friends where it kind of sounds like you're not friends at all when people hear you talk, but that's just because you know each other and you know how to talk to each other. So positive reinforcement doesn't have to be like this bubbly, like you did a great job thing. It should just be like consistent in the way that you engage or those people engage. And that could be different depending on the person and the time that folks spend together. So I've touched a little bit on this, and I want to talk a little bit more about feedback on feedback. So, there's a lot of different ways to give feedback, positive or negative. But for me, it's teaching people to recognize something that works for them, and teaching other people. If I'm the manager, I need to understand what works for you. And if it's not a managerial, like a manager, employee, employer kind of thing, it could just be like, hey, my peer and I give feedback. Hey, it would be really great if you did this for me next time. Like I asked you for a list of requirements and you sent me 10 bullet points and 10 messages. Like in the future, can you just like put it all in the wiki or in a doc or something? Like just sort of saying like, hey, here's a way that you can do better for me, and maybe that would help you do better for others. And when you like recognize that and you improve on it, then that makes you oftentimes things better for everybody else. But for me, it's about maintaining the dialogue. It's just knowing that people can do things, that I can do things better sometimes. And oftentimes, a great example of this happened earlier in the week. I asked somebody, hey, I need you to put a doc together that explains the following things. And I will handle a couple of those slides. And if you're not sure, just assign me work. And it was surprising to that individual that that I told them that they can just assign me work. Because a lot of times people aren't used to their boss saying, just assign me the work and I'll, pick up the slack or do the thing. So just saying like, oh, I didn't realize that I hadn't made that clear to you or to some of the other folks on my teams, that like, if there's something that I would normally be responsible for, then you can assign me that work. And if I can't do it on the, that date or time or whatever, like I'll say, hey, I need an extra day or a few hours or whatever it is. But just being open about that feedback process reminds people that there are other ways to work, and it doesn't just have to be the way things were in the past. So all of this really serves to create, and I know I talk about this ad nauseum, like a lot, to create the right kind of culture. So a lot of this is being clear with expectations, balancing feedback, timing and amount and specificity, and really getting people comfortable in the situations they're in, not stopping them from feeling like they can contribute. Because if you think about how people contribute, sometimes you've got introverts, you've got extroverts, you've got somewhere in some gradation in the middle, ambiverts, whatever it is. Some people are more comfortable sharing than others, and you want to make sure that everyone feels safe. And so I've talked about psychological safety before, but I want to just talk about like what's valuable from the manager perspective, or how you can make that situation better in terms of feedback. So encouraging questions and discussions from all people, irrespective of how they would engage. That doesn't mean that every single person has to have an opinion on or a suggestion on every single thing that happens. There's just not enough hours in the day for that. And also some people are not qualified to be giving opinions or on, like if you've got somebody who's like a front end developer, they're not going to be necessarily qualified to give database structure suggestions. Like that's sometimes the way it is, but they shouldn't feel uncomfortable to do so. They can give a suggestion and say, hey, like I'll explain to you later why that doesn't work, but like I want to focus on some of the folks here who are more of the database experts. Like you can give them, you can encourage discussion without shooting people down in a way where they feel like they can't contribute in the future. And that's a little bit of like learning when and how to keep the discussions moving. That was an example that I just gave. And showing appreciation for different perspectives and diversity of ideas. Like this is a hard thing to do because a lot of people are like, I want to get to the solution. I want to be done with this. I want to get the solution, start implementing it. And sometimes just taking a little bit longer to think about it or hearing somebody else's idea triggers something in your mind, and you can have a different way of dealing with it. And this is one of the most important things, is allow for mistakes and showing like vulnerability, because this to me is one of the real things that makes everybody understand that it's safe to contribute and be a part of these kinds of things. So a little bit about vulnerability is just by definition, it's the willingness to show authenticity, including admitting mistakes or saying, I don't know, and being uncertain of things. That's okay. We're allowed to not know everything. There's this weird thing from the 1960s called zero defect culture. It started in American, like many challenging things that started in America, but it started in American auto manufacturing. I believe it was Ford. And they were like, there are no defects allowed. And that created a problem where one defect would get people fired or reprimanded in some way. And this creates a level of fear that doesn't allow people to operate in a consistent way. So if your culture, that your thing is like, there's no room for mistakes, that almost never goes well. And it doesn't really feel human because we all make mistakes. So by creating the culture that says, hey, stuff can happen, but like, let's be smart about how we deal with it. That's the kind of culture that I think fosters growth, because learning is sometimes happens because we find something out in advance, but sometimes it just happens because we make a mistake and we're like, I probably shouldn't do that again. So I don't like this notion that vulnerability is a weakness, because to me it's not. And I think to most people it's not. So if you haven't seen the Barbie movie, I highly recommend it. I think it was an excellent thing, excellent movie, very well done. And there's a point in this movie where Ryan Gosling is singing, who did Incredible as Ken, who's singing I'm Just Ken. And there's a line in there where he goes, is it a crime? Am I not hot when I'm in my feelings? Which is like an objectively kind of funny way to say, is it not okay to be the person I am on the inside, on the outside? And so that's being vulnerable, right? Like in that world, it's being hot, but like that's just being vulnerable and saying, here's authentically who I am. And I think that's an incredibly important skill as a manager because most of us have not been doing management for 10, 15, 20 years. It's not natural as a thing to say, I know how to do all of these things with management. And so sometimes you're like, hey, I'm not sure what to do here. So can I get some support? And that's not bad. That's just being vulnerable and saying like, that's who I am on the inside and on the outside. So showing that level of authenticity builds trust and respect. It makes you more relatable because there is no zero defect world. We all sort of make mistakes, and that's a very relatable thing. So if you say, if you're always on the outside, well, nothing's ever wrong. We never made mistakes. I don't make these mistakes. Like that's not relatable. No one knows what that. Like people who act like that, but that's not a relatable thing, and it's not like a method of communication that makes other people feel safe to say, I don't know. And also, if you admit a mistake, you help others learn from it. You'd be like, hey, I made this mistake, and here's what I did, and here's how I recognized it. And it makes the teams and the individuals feel safer in taking risks, which lead to creativity and innovation and all of those things that are incredibly important to do software engineering well. So to sort of start to wrap this up, some of the really important things here is like being smart about on-the-spot corrections and just being smart about corrections in general. Like don't overuse them and don't use them to avoid having those difficult conversations that we talked about. Don't stick to positive or negative. Like it needs to be some balance of there, even on an individual basis. And if you get feedback about the way you've given feedback, like even if it comes out as like somebody screaming at you, because that's the reaction, don't ignore that. Like, de-escalate the situation, but say like, hey, let's figure out a way to communicate that doesn't lead to one of us yelling or something like that. So having self-awareness and reflecting on how you've done things is really important, and start trusting yourself to apply some of these lessons in everyday situations. There is nothing wrong with like having this open, this presentation open in a tab, and then like flipping over to it just to give somebody feedback and say, hey, like, and then you insert that feedback. Because it's still going to make the person feel good. It's still going to reinforce the thing that you wanted to reinforce. And just because it wasn't your exact words doesn't change the net effect of it. So having these things in your back pocket is a really valuable thing. So start trusting yourself to identify these situations and seeing how it works. And keep in mind that not everyone's in the same in how they deliver and receive information. So to now finally wrap this up, all this stuff has their place. And the goal should be to create an environment where people can and do excel in the work that's being done. So deliver the feedback, read the room, and being vulnerable and authentic, that's a strength. And that's what helps people become better managers and sort of better people. So that's it for today. Thanks, everybody. Thanks for your time. Thanks for your support. I hope this was helpful. And I will see you all. Have a good weekend, and I will see you all next week.